Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're in chapter 16 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled Dissolving the Ego. Ego Serves No Purpose. This is where I'm going to help you understand what the ego is and the complications that you experience because of having an ego. And then I'm going to teach you how to actually eliminate it from the mind. Of course, we're going to start with meditation first, and then afterwards, I'll move into the talk to help you guys to understand this. And if you're reading the book either before and or after class, this will really help you because, of course, I'm going to teach it to a certain level of detail in class, but there's also certain things in the book that don't actually get shared in the class. And there's certain things in the class that aren't in the book. So certain times when you're reading, this is really helpful to be able to read the book as you're going along in the program. And if you need access to this, you can get it from our website at buddhadailywisdom.com. You can download it for free. You can take it and go print it. You can get printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them at the temple here in Chiang Mai. So I'd like to welcome all of you to our class today, and at the same time invite you to join for our meditation. Of course, I'm going to start with chanting to ease us into the meditation. Then I'm going to come in with some guidance. There'll be a period of time it'll just be quiet. And then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting as well. So if you'd like to join, you might pull up a cushion or a chair or however it is that you like to position the body for meditation. There's 4 positions that you'll learn over the course of your journey to enlightenment, which is seated, lying, standing, and walking position. But oftentimes seated is best for online learning. But you can also do lying or standing as well. So if you'd like to join for the chanting, feel free. You're welcome to chant along. And then I'm going to come back afterwards with some guidance to help you in meditation. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Apivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakatoro Kavitu Anuttaro Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanang Oto Bhagavati. Okay, with the hands and arms and lower body comfortable, and the upper body erect. Just close the eyes And start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled. Just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then, whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. หังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเกวาพุทธังมหาเกวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเกวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเกวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหาเกวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารนังสัมมุโนสกาโตโรกาวิโตอนุเตโรปุริสาดัมมาสติสัตตาตวามนุสนังโหโตภะคะวะติ Okay, if you'd like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of you to our class today, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been joining regularly. Welcome to our class. Today, we're in chapter 16 of our book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled Dissolving the Ego. Ego serves no purpose. This is where you're going to learn about something that is really sabotaging your ability to have harmonious relationships, as well as really excel in various parts of your life. It's even sabotaging your ability to experience enlightenment. So I'm going to explain to you what the ego is, how it manifests in terms of the various symptoms that you experience because of it. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our class talking about how to actually eliminate the ego. Because in order to get to enlightenment, where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, you're going to need to eliminate the ego. As long as the ego is there, the mind's not actually going to be experiencing enlightenment. So you're going to need to learn what it is, the symptoms, so that you can spot it when it's coming up in your mind. And you're going to need to know the tools and techniques to be able to eliminate it. Just like always, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to ask those as we go through the class. If you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, you can put that into the comment section and I'll be sure to see that and then answer your question for you. And if you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand, ask any questions that you like by just opening up your microphone. We'll be able to hear you, and then people will be able to hear you through the live stream as well. So the first thing to talk about is what the ego actually is. So let me help you to understand what it is, because this word ego didn't actually exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. You won't see him using the word ego, but he does describe what we refer to as the ego, and I'll explain to you what that is. So he definitely taught to eliminate the ego. It's just that he didn't have access to this particular word because it didn't exist yet. The ego is a collection of your experiences from the past or your future expectations of yourself. It's an accumulation of thoughts, ideas, and perceptions that you have of your self-image, of how you would like to be perceived by others in terms of your self-image, and the self-identity that the mind is holding on to. The ego contains arrogance, pride, judgment, measuring and comparing as if you're superior to people or you're inferior to people. And that this is actually just as dangerous. Putting yourself above people or below people is actually just as dangerous, because putting yourself below people, you might feel that uncalm or shaken up because of this. So the ego is all of these things together that I'm just describing, and it's inside the mind, and it can actually be eradicated because it's impermanent and it's not needed. It serves no purpose whatsoever. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, like I mentioned, this word ego didn't exist. So there was two things that he was describing that he identified in the mind that we refer to as the ego. And it's important to understand them in the way that the Buddha taught them, because these two things that we're combining and describing as the ego, they actually have different symptoms, and there's different techniques in order to eliminate them. If you've been studying with me for any amount of time, you might remember that I've discussed the 10 fetters. These are the 10 individual pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind. And he called them fetters because during ancient times, they would put a shackle and a chain and a ball around a prisoner's leg and keep them in an open field and keep them confined to a certain area. Where today we put prisoners in jail cells or prison cells, during the ancient times and during the lifetime of the Buddha, they would put this shackle and chain and ball around your ankle. And this is how you were confined to a certain area. And this was called a fetter. So these 10 pollutions that the Buddha discovered in the mind, he referred to them as 10 fetters or taints or defilements. And this is what's keeping the mind trapped in that unenlightened state. And what you're doing on your journey to enlightenment is you're working to understand what these are and actually eliminate them. And all the tools and techniques that the Buddha teaches is to purify the mind of these 10 fetters. So there's two fetters that are actually involved in the ego and what we refer to as the ego. The first one is called personal existence view, and the other one is called conceit. So I'm going to describe what these two are, helping you understand what they are, and then the symptoms that you're going to experience because of them. Then we're going to talk about some of the complications that you experience because of these, and then we'll talk about how to actually eradicate them. And remember, when you're learning the teachings of the Buddha, nothing is about belief. So as I'm describing what it is that these two pollutions are, it's helpful for you to learn intellectually and understand it, but then also start reflecting, because some of the examples that I give you are things that you've actually experienced in life. And then you can independently verify and confirm for yourself that your mind actually has these pollutions. You need to be able to see that clearly of what these pollutions are, understanding the description of them intellectually, but then using that to reflect and be able to confirm that, yes, these pollutions are actually in your mind, because some of the examples that I'm explaining to you are things that you've experienced or you know other people have experienced. And then ultimately, once you've learned and reflected, then you start practicing, meaning you implement the solutions that I'll share with you about how to actually eliminate and dissolve the ego. So this first fetter that is combining to what we refer to as the ego is called personal existence view. This is where the mind has confusion or misunderstanding. It has a lack of wisdom. It has a misperception. It thinks that this body is you or this mind is you. And because of that, clinging and holding on to the body, wanting to be perceived in the world a certain way, the mind, when it experiences agreeable contact, it experiences pleasant feelings. Or when it has disagreeable contact, it experiences painful feelings. So for example, if you're clinging to this body or the self-image, if you spill spaghetti sauce or chocolate ice cream on your clothing in a social situation, you'll feel embarrassment, because the mind is clinging to this body, wanting to be perceived in the world a certain way. And when the mind's being perceived that way, and it's got that intact, and that self-image is being perceived by others in the way that the mind wants it to be perceived, then you're happy. And then when the mind is experiencing this difference, this impermanence of the chocolate ice cream or the spaghetti sauce or what have you on the clothing, then the mind isn't getting what it wants. It's not being perceived in the world the way that it wants to be perceived. And now the mind experiences the embarrassment or frustration or annoyment or some other discontent feeling. So as long as the mind is clinging to this self-image, you're going to experience the shaking up of the mind. Because of impermanence, you can't permanently be perceived in the world exactly the way your mind wants it to be perceived. And not only do you experience this when you have something maybe spilled on your clothing, but if you've ever been in the mirror constantly trying to fix your hair, maybe when you were younger, when you're in your teens or something like that, you might have been trying to get every last little hair in place. I know I used to. I used to work the gel and work the mousse and work it through the hair, and I'd be standing there for 15, 20 minutes sometimes. Sometimes I was late for the bus to go to school because I was trying to get every single hair in place before I went outside. I couldn't feel comfortable unless I got that hair exactly right? Or you might have been in the mirror looking at a pimple or a mole or a wrinkle or maybe some gray hair, or maybe you got a little bit extra fat here or there. The mind is clinging to this body, wanting to be perceived by others in a certain way, and it can't feel comfortable unless it's being perceived that way. That the mind experiences this craving, this clinging, wanting the self-image to appear to others in a certain way. And then when it's being experienced that way, the mind experiences the happiness. But when you don't experience that, when the mind's not getting what it wants, it feels uncomfortable. There's some discontentedness there, maybe some frustration or agitation or annoyment or some other discontent feeling. And this is because of the pollution of personal existence view, where the mind is holding on to this body, thinking that this is who you are. Then there's the self-identity in the mind. Things like culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, maybe your nationality or your job or occupation. And there's others as well that the mind can cling to this I am, like I am Polish, or I am American, or I am Canadian, or I am British, or I am Australian, or I am Lithuanian, or I am German. This is like around nationality, right? If you're clinging to that, and now you identify with I am American or I am Polish, and you hear people say positive and agreeable things about that nationality, you'll get happy and excited or perhaps elated because now they're talking about me and that's who I am. I am American. But then it's only a matter of time before somebody says something degrading and disparaging about your nationality, your sexual orientation, your job or occupation, your culture, your ethnicity, any number of things. And now when you're sitting in a restaurant and 2 tables over, somebody's saying something degrading and disparaging and you identify with I am American, and now they're talking negatively about Americans, you'll get angry, you'll get frustrated because your mind is clinging to this identity, thinking that this is who you are. If you've ever been in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend and you cling to the identity of I am a boyfriend or I am a girlfriend, when you guys were together and that identity was in place, you might have felt fine, you might have felt whole. But then when you guys separated, you might have really struggled during that time because now the mind is confronted with I am single. And the mind doesn't identify that way. The mind identifies with I am a boyfriend, I am a girlfriend, I am a husband, I am a wife. And now when I am single is being experienced, the mind is uncomfortable with that. And the mind's lack of wisdom thinks the way to solve this is to hurry up and get right back into another relationship. So you might have found that when you broke up with a boyfriend or girlfriend, you might wanted to feel like you wanted to hurry up and get right back into another relationship again. This is that craving, that desire, that clinging and holding on to the self-identity. Or say you were in a job or occupation. Maybe you were doing something for an extended period of time and your mind identified with that as who you are. Like I am a taxi driver. I am a food server. I am a police officer. And now let's just say that identity of I am a police officer is in the mind. And now maybe you get injured or you lose your job or you retire or something like this. And now when that's occurred, when you're not doing that job anymore and the mind is identifying with I am a police officer, you might not feel whole. You might not feel intact. And now the mind struggles during that period of time because the identity of I am a police officer is being held on to in the mind. And now when you're maybe an electrician, the mind doesn't identify that way and you feel like lost and less of a person. Or if you retire, you might feel lost or less of a person because you're not doing that work anymore. So the mind can cling to any number of things as part of your identity. And what you ultimately need to get to is get to the point where you understand that perhaps this body was born on a land that we refer to as America, but your mind doesn't identify with I am American. Where you understand you're performing a certain role as a police officer, but the mind doesn't have to adopt that as your identity and crave for that to be permanent and cling to it. Because if you understand impermanence, you understand that this isn't permanent. So as soon as you cling to the self-image about the physical body or the self-identity, anything that's in the mind that you identify with, when you start experiencing change and everything around you is changing because of the universal truth of impermanence, as soon as you start experiencing change related to the self-image or self-identity, you will struggle during that time. In fact, living here in Thailand, I see a lot of tourists come here, and sometimes there's people who come here that are looking for their true self. They say, I don't even know who I am anymore. I need to go find my true self. I need to go on this journey to find myself. Well, they might come to Thailand and they might spend an exorbitant amount of time here. And at the end of their trip, they might be like, I found myself. Nope, they didn't find themselves because there is no self. This is what the Buddha explains to us, is that there is no self. What they found is they found new hobbies, they found new activities, they found new friends, they might have found a new job or something like this, but they didn't find themselves because none of that stuff defines who you are. None of the self-image, the self-identity, none of the past experiences that you've had in life, none of the feelings or perceptions like your views and opinions, not your choices and decisions. None of these things actually define who you are as a person. Because as soon as you grab onto those things and try to allow it to define your identity or your self-image, you're going to struggle because these things are all going to change. So this is part of what's referred to as the ego. We refer to it as the ego, but the Buddha talked about it as personal existence view because, as you can see, it's very unique in what it's doing to the mind and how the mind perceives the world around you. So as long as you have the view that this is your existence and this is who you are as a person, this physical body or this mind, as long as you maintain that personal existence view, this is a pollution in the mind that's just going to cause it to be shaken up in any number one of these situations and countless others. So this needs to be eliminated. And the solution that the Buddha shares with us that you might have learned with me when we talked about the three universal truths is the universal truth of non-self, where the Buddha teaches you that there is no self. And I help students to be able to independently verify that in those three different ways. I suggest to you to look at how you viewed yourself when you were a child, when you were a teenager, early adulthood, and now. And you can see that your image and your thoughts and your ideas about who you are as a person has been constantly changing, that there isn't a permanent self. I even talk about, if you had an amputation of your arm and you only have one hand and one arm, are you less of a person? And I ask students this, and usually they say, no, I'm not less of a person. I just have less use of a hand and arm. So there you can see that this body isn't you. Because if I asked you the question, if your arm is amputated, are you less of a person? You would say yes, because in that situation, you're thinking that this body is you. But this is where the confusion and the delusion comes in, because the mind, in the heat of the moment, when somebody says something degrading or disparaging about this physical body, the mind being confused, it will get angry and upset and frustrated. So if your arm is amputated, you can see that you're not less of a person. So intellectually, you understand that this body isn't you and that this mind isn't you either. But the mind's confusion and misunderstanding and misperception will oftentimes cling to these things, thinking that this is you. And then we talk about, point to yourself. And I ask students to point to themselves. And they sometimes will point to their chest or to their head. And I go through this series of things of showing you that the shirt is not you, the skin is not you, the bones and fluid and organs and muscle tissue, none of these things are actually you. But because of the confusion and the misunderstanding and the misperception, the lack of wisdom that the mind has, this pollution of personal existence view, it will think that this is actually you. So this is the first fetter that's involved in the ego. But now we're going to talk about conceit, because this is the next fetter. This is actually the 8th fetter. It's part of the higher fetters. And it takes a lot of time to get rid of both of these. It's not a one-day thing. It's not a 1-month thing. It's not a 1-year thing. It takes time for the mind to understand what these fetters are and be able to observe them in day-to-day life and then apply the tools and techniques to eliminate them. So this personal existence view, if you're having challenges to understand it, that's understandable, right? So feel free to ask questions when we get to question period, and I'll be able to help you to make sure you understand what personal existence view is. But even still, sometimes people need 3, 4, 5, even 10 conversations before they understand what personal existence view is. Conceit is a bit easier to understand, but it's really hard to get rid of. So conceit, what this is this is the arrogance, the pride, the judging, where you're judging other people, measuring and comparing yourself, making yourself appear to be superior or inferior to other people. This is where if you put yourself above people, you might talk down to them in one particular way, or you might put yourself below people and you look up to people in such awe and admiration. Your mind is uncalm and shaken up in these situations. So if you've ever put yourself above people, you might talk down to people with arrogance and pride. And now when people experience that, they kind of push you to the side and they're not interested in being around this arrogance or pride. Or if you put yourself below people, like maybe your boss or a celebrity or a politician or something like this, you might feel uncalm and shaken up when you're around your boss because you think they're so much higher than you and above you. And now you have difficulties performing at work. So this conceit is just going to cause you difficulties and problems in life because the mind is constantly putting itself above people and putting itself below people. And if you're at a social situation, for example, and you're constantly judging people and trying to figure out who you're above and who you're below, your mind is obsessively trying to figure this out, and you're constantly trying to figure out who's above me and who's below me. And now it's difficult to have conversation in a social situation. So you might have experienced that where you go into a party or you go into a business meeting or something and you're kind of looking at people and judging and measuring people and trying to figure out who's above you and who's below you. And now you can't just reside peaceful and joyful in the present moment. The conceit is going to hinder you from being able to have harmonious relationships with others. Because as I mentioned, in some cases, you'll talk down to people with arrogance and pride and they'll push you aside. And in other cases, you'll put yourself below people and your mind will be all shaken up. Where this conceit is coming from is our animal existences. That because we're in this human realm, we've all been countless beings in the past. And many of us have been many countless animals in the past. And you may not be able to verify that right now. But here's the reason why conceit is in the mind. That in our animal existences, we needed conceit. That when we were in a pack of wolves, we needed to know who's the alpha male and who's the alpha female, because they're teaching us how to survive. If we didn't know who the alpha male and alpha female was in our pack of wolves, we wouldn't have learned how to hunt and we wouldn't have learned how to survive. So we needed to know who was above us and who was below us. And the same thing's true when we were in a herd of elephants. We needed to know who's the matriarch of our herd because she's going to show us where to eat. She's going to show us the watering holes. She's going to show us the migration paths. And as we follow the matriarch of our herd, we're going to be learning about survival. So if we didn't know who the matriarch of our herd was, we wouldn't have been able to survive as a young elephant. And because we've had so many countless existences and many different animals, and each one of these animals, there's a pecking order. When the mind comes into the human realm, the mind retains part of this consciousness, even though it's a completely different consciousness and you're now in a human existence. The mind is conditioned by these countless existences in our animal, in the animal realm. And now in the human realm, we retain this conceit. And now the mind is constantly trying to figure out this pecking order when you're around people, putting yourself above people and putting yourself below people. But in the human realm, we don't need conceit. We don't need it in order to survive. In fact, it's just hindering you from being able to have harmonious relationships. So it's important to be able to understand what it is so that you can eliminate it from the mind. So before we go any further, let me just pause here and see if we have any questions about personal existence view or conceit, understanding what it is. And then I'm going to talk here in a little bit more about the complications that you experience. And then we're going to talk about the solutions of how to eliminate it. So if you have any questions on what personal existence view is or conceit, these two pollutions or these two fetters, let me know, and then I'll be able to answer those. You can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Jacob has a question. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute, sir, you can ask your question.
Yes, David, I got a question. Is parents' conditioning will be considered as conceit? Because obviously when we are kids, we look up to our parents, right? Because we have to. And they condition our mind in specific ways, just as our surroundings, society, movies, everything. So is parenting will be considered as conceit or part of conceit?
So the mind does acquire conceit and accumulate more and more of it as you go through life based in what you described. Like when you're in a parenting role, if a parents take a very dominant, very controlling role in the relationship with their child and they talk down to their child, then yeah, the child's mind gets conditioned to have this conceit. And it's not that, we should blame our parents or think of them as being at fault, but this is part of what contributes to the conceit being developed and retained in the mind in this ego. But as a wise parent who is learning the path to enlightenment and eliminating conceit, you don't actually need to have that type of relationship with your child. You don't need to have this dominant role in your child's life in order to guide them and nurture them and help them to grow in the world. But oftentimes, because of the parents' conceit, they don't know how to parent in any other way because they were maybe parented that way as well. But let's just say somebody gets to enlightenment when their child's like 4 or 6 or 7 years old. This parent, having gotten to enlightenment and eliminating their own conceit, now they can have a relationship with their child where there isn't conceit involved. And now their child can learn how to have a relationship with others without conceit. But what you're describing is a contributing factor to the mind acquiring conceit. But ultimately, it's up to each individual that you're choosing to acquire conceit as part of your journey in life, because you can choose with wisdom not to have conceit if you gradually gain the wisdom of how to eliminate it and then practice in a way where there is no conceit.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I got one more question about the first part, the personal existence view.
Sure, go ahead.
A second, something just... Yeah, because I was introduced to something similar before, but I'm not sure is that going to be what we're talking about, or is that a completely different thing. I was introduced to the concept that in every conversation there is 6 people. There is me, you, then my image of you, your image of me, and then my image of myself, and your image of yourself. So that is like 4 images and 2 essential people.
Yeah,
that would be something that we would...
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Yeah, is that will be a personal existence view as well, or is it a different concept?
No, none of this that I'm sharing with you is a concept. All of it is a teaching. It's something that you can independently verify. What you're describing isn't actually true, that in every conversation, those things don't exist. Because, for example, for an enlightened being, if you're talking to an enlightened being, those things don't exist. They don't have a certain image of themselves. They don't have an image of you and a judgment of you. These are things that the Buddha didn't teach. And unfortunately, if you've been exposed to this and it's in a Buddhist context, people oftentimes bring in things that aren't actually from the Buddha. More of what you're describing is what the Buddha taught, which is clinging to perceptions, where the mind has a certain view or opinion about the world or other people, and now you cling to that perception. And this is very unwise to cling to any kind of perception, but it's not part of the personal existence view.
So the personal existence will be just me perceiving myself as an ego, as a part of the ego.
Yes, you have certain perceptions of how you view your self-image and your self-identity, and now the mind's clinging to that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. We have some questions coming in Zoom. Helena asked, would you please describe how daily human interactions feel when the mind doesn't have to spend energy on protecting the ego anymore? The mind is light, it's bright, it's uplifted. They're not carrying around this burden of constantly trying to carry around this ego and compare other people. You can relate to all people harmoniously, and you just see people as they are. What Jacob was describing is something that the unenlightened mind does, but it's not every conversation that the mind does that, because enlightened beings don't do that. But what the unenlightened mind will tend to do is it will insert its own thoughts of itself and other people into a conversation or into a situation where you look at somebody else and you judge somebody else, and now you kind of measure and compare them. And now things that aren't even there, the mind is like telling itself a story in its own mind. And now you're making decisions based off of those false truths. And it leads you down a path of unwholesome results because your mind is diluted with certain misperceptions about this other person. And now you can't relate to all beings harmoniously. So when you get rid of all of that, it's just like, hi, everybody's, a friend, essentially. Everybody's a family member. You're not trying to measure and compare. You're not putting yourself above or below people. You're not carrying around this heavy burden of constantly trying to size people up. And the mind can just be so light and uplifted. One of the things that I don't think you've heard me share before, Helena, is that by the time you get to enlightenment, you don't experience tiredness. You experience sleepiness, where the mind needs to sleep and the mind's sleepy, but you don't feel this exhaustion or this tiredness where, like, at the end of the day, if someone has a lot of cravings, you can go through your day and you get to the end of your day and you just like drag yourself home because you're carrying around such a heavy burden. You might feel like you have bricks on your shoulders or bricks on your feet, and you just plop down at home. Because when you go through life with a bunch of cravings, if you get a lot of your cravings fulfilled in a certain day, you'll be like, yay, this is such a good day. Oh, I feel so great. It's such a wonderful day. But then with those same cravings, you'll go out some days and they won't get fulfilled. And your mind will experience this sadness and anger. It'll feel like a hectic day and nothing went right for you all day because the mind is carrying around this burden of craving, desire, attachment. But when you get rid of the ego, and the ego contains a bunch of craving, desire, attachment, when you get rid of that burden, every day is a good day. Every person you encounter is a friend and a family member, and life is so uplifting, and you don't experience this tiredness and exhaustion. So that's what are some of the benefits of having eliminated the ego, along with having harmonious relationships. Julia is asking a question. She says, thank you, Teacher David. Sometimes I feel upset when people do not respond kindly. I think I have an expectation that my behavior will be returned. For example, if I am welcoming or help others out, I expect to be treated that way. How can I brush this off, as I know I cannot control others? Yeah, there's definitely a craving there of wanting other people and expecting other people to do a certain thing. You're going to hear me talk about that here in a moment with the ego, that this is part of the ego, but essentially it's craving, desire, attachment, that the mind has an expectation, a longing, a yearning, wanting people to be a certain way. And you need to be able to just love them as they are and not cast your wholesome qualities that you have going on in your mind on other people and expecting other people to do those same kinds of things. So you're going to need to continue with your breathing mindfulness meditation, your generosity. And then in those situations where you see that bubbling up, where your mind's expecting other people to act a certain way, you got to cut that off and let it go and realize impermanence, that you function in a certain way and other people are going to function in a certain way. And this is normal because it's impermanence. You got to get rid of any expectation of others to be a certain way. That gets you not only closer to eliminating the ego, but it also gets you closer to practicing what we talked about last week, which is true love, where you just love people as they are, not wanting them to be any particular way, not expecting them to be any particular way, but just loving them as they are. So it's the gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that is going to wear this away. So proactively, you can be doing breathing mindfulness meditation and practicing generosity. But then in the moment, whenever those discontent feelings are arising, you need to cut them off and let them go. And if you can cut them off as a bodily sensation, that would be ideal. And then the more you just keep trimming this back and trimming it back and trimming it back, accumulating the benefits, eventually this attachment will release and it'll be eliminated. This expectation will be eliminated from the mind. The Buddha describes these cravings, desires, attachments as stubborn. There's a place where he describes it this way in his teachings, that there's these stubborn cravings. And then he also talks about this maturing and release. One of the ways that I talk about it is you need to accumulate the benefits of consistent meditation, generosity, and cutting off and letting go, and cutting off and letting go. What the Buddha describes is this maturing and release, where the mind needs to mature and mature and mature and mature until eventually it releases from the mind, that particular attachment. Some of these attachments you can actually feel exactly when they leave out of the mind. and it's referred to as maturing and release. So as you've been learning since the beginning of the group learning program, there's these various tools and techniques that you're going to just need to be diligent to continue to consistently apply. And the mind just hasn't let go yet. It hasn't let go of that particular expectation and attachment. So this is where it can be somewhat challenging, because you're doing the work, you intellectually know what you need to be doing, you're working on doing that, but the mind just hasn't released it yet. So this is where it's like kind of like a jackhammer. You just got to keep plugging away at it and plugging away at it and breaking it up. Okay, we have something here coming in Zoom as well. I did not understand what is impermanence. The universal truth of impermanence is something that I teach at the very beginning of all the foundational programs, where the universal truth of impermanence is explaining that everything around you is constantly changing. There isn't this constant fixed state. So the weather is constantly changing. The physical body is constantly changing. Your bank account is constantly changing. Your relationships are constantly changing. Everything around you is constantly changing. This is a universal truth. And this is so important to understand because the unenlightened mind is craving permanence. It's wanting things to be permanent, but yet you live in an impermanent world. This is why when you were together with a boyfriend or girlfriend, you felt pretty good during that period of time. But then when you guys broke up, the mind struggled during that time because it craved for this relationship to be permanent, when in reality it is impermanent. Or say you were having a brand new car and that car gets a scratch on it. You get angry and frustrated. This is because the mind's craving permanence, but yet everything around you is impermanent. So the Buddha is explaining to you the way the world is. He's not explaining to you the way the world should be. He's explaining to you the way the world is, because the unenlightened mind lacks wisdom of the way the world is. It lacks wisdom of the natural laws of existence. So by you understanding the way the world is through these universal truths, and you see what your unenlightened mind is doing, then you can apply the training and the tools and techniques to fix it. Because the mind keeps craving permanence. It wants grandma and grandpa to be permanent. It wants your money to be permanent. It wants your clothes or jewelry to be permanent. It wants your relationships to be permanent. And when you keep experiencing this constant change, the mind doesn't like it. So in the example with Julia, she was expecting for other people to function the same way as her. This is the craving for permanence. But she lives in an impermanent world, just like we all do, where things are constantly changing and everybody's going to be different in the world. So if the mind craves for others to be the same as you, then you're going to be discontent. You're going to be annoyed and frustrated and agitated when people aren't doing the same things as you. And this is coming from the mind's craving, desire, attachment, but it's also coming from the ego. Oftentimes there's multiple fetters involved in any one particular situation where there's discontentedness. So here in a moment, I'm going to describe to you some other things that the ego is doing and that's causing complications for you. But let me just see if there's any more questions anywhere on our other platforms. Let's see. Okay. I see a question here from Mayu Lee. Mayu Lee is asking, just recently, I had a random man that approached this being with compliment and asked for contact information. I was not judging. I was being kind, friendly, and showing compassion for that being. But at the same time, I felt uncomfortable, awkward. Would that considered as personal existence view or fear or both? I need to talk with you some more, Mayuli, than just what you're sharing here. This is a good start to understand. There's a good chance that personal existence view was involved, but there could also be some central desire there as well. So I would need to talk with you a bit more to really understand 100%. Okay, so here she's saying, yes, I don't feel that it was ego. Okay. So yeah, if you would like to talk privately, you're welcome to schedule an appointment, or we can you can send me a private message, or if you'd like to come into Zoom after class, you can come into Zoom and we can talk after class as well. Or you can share more during class if you'd like, up to you. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So let me talk to you a bit more about what the ego does, because now that you understand there's this personal existence view and conceit, whenever I say the word ego, I'm talking about both of these things together. And these are some of the things that the mind is doing because of its ego. The ego stands in the way of you seeing true reality, that when you meet other people, that you might be judging their unwholesome qualities. You might be looking at them and thinking that certain unwholesome qualities that you're seeing in them, you might be thinking that it's actually coming from that person when in reality it's coming from you. Here's what I mean by this, where the mind is projecting its unwholesome qualities on others, and then you read that reflection coming back to you as if it's coming from the other person, when in reality it's coming from you. Say you're in a business meeting and somebody walks in, and maybe this man or woman is wearing some really beautiful clothing. Maybe their hair is just so perfect. Maybe their face just looks a certain way. Maybe they have just this nice complexion, and they walk in, they smell great. Maybe they're handsome and they're really beautiful, right? Or handsome or beautiful. And when they walk into the conference room in your business meeting, you might think in your mind right away, look at them trying to look so handsome, or look at them trying to look so beautiful. Don't they think they're special, right? All that's happened in this situation is somebody walked into the room. That's all that's happened. But the mind, having its own personal existence view and conceit, this ego, it's casting those unwholesome qualities within your own mind on that person. The mind thinks that, look at them trying to be so handsome or beautiful. When in reality, it's your own mind that wants to be perceived by others as being handsome or beautiful. And when you see this person walk in who potentially might be handsome or beautiful, your mind thinks, look at them trying to do this particular thing. When in reality, it's your own mind that wants that particular thing, and the mind thinks that it's other people who want that too. So it's kind of like looking out at the world through a dirty window. When you have ego, it's like a dirty window, and you're looking out at the world and you're reading this dirt as coming from other people, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. So it stands in the way of you seeing true reality of various people and different relationships, whether it's a coworker, a colleague, a business partner, a personal friend or family member or something like this. These unwholesome qualities that are in one's own mind, because of the ego, it'll cast those onto other people. And then you read that reflection coming back to you as if it's coming from them, when in reality it's coming from your own mind. So it stands in the way of you being able to see true reality of what truly just happened is somebody just walked into the room. That's all that happened. And now in that business meeting, when this person maybe speaks up and shares a certain idea, maybe because of your feelings in this situation, you become unskillful. And maybe you talk to them in degrading or disparaging ways. And now your other coworkers or maybe your boss sees this, and you're not performing very well at the job. And you would like to get this out of the way so that you can just have harmonious relationships and you can benefit from wholesome relationships. What the mind's doing here is it's judging other people. It's attempting to determine what is right or wrong for another person while putting yourself above them or below them with arrogance or pride. You might be comparing yourself and looking at yourself as being superior or inferior and trying to declare what is wholesome or unwholesome for other people, or what is good or bad for other people. This judgment is all based in conceit, and it's harming your mind, and it needs to be eliminated in order to attain enlightenment. So as long as the mind is measuring and comparing and judging other people, casting your unwholesome qualities onto people and reading this as coming from them, your mind is just burdened with all this work. And this is why I talked about an unenlightened mind will be tired at the end of the day. It'll be exhausted from doing all of this. When you get rid of all of this, your mind can be at ease. And this is why you can have sustainable energy all through your day. What essentially the mind's doing here is clinging to its perceptions. What a perception is a belief or opinion about how things seem to be in the world. And it may or may not even be true. We might refer to these as assumptions. That if somebody forms an assumption in their mind and they cling to that, or they cling to a perception, now you're making decisions based on false truths that you don't necessarily know what's actually happened. Here's one of the ways that I typically will teach what a perception is. If you are a police officer and you're being trained to be a police officer, you're being trained to not cling to your perceptions. Because if you cling to a perception, you could make a life or death decision that ends up with you being in a lot of trouble and a lot of difficulty. As a police officer, maybe you get a call over the radio that says, hey, there's a robbery down here at this convenience store and somebody's got a gun and we would like you to go down there and take care of it. And of course, they speak other ways, right? They speak in codes and all that kind of stuff, right? But nonetheless, they're asking this police officer to go take care of this robbery in progress, right? Well, let's just say the police officer shows up, lights and sirens are running. Maybe they walk in, they see that there's someone in a black hoodie with a gun standing over somebody, and somebody's laying on the ground with a gunshot wound and they're bleeding out on the floor, right? Well, if this police officer clings to their perceptions, they might walk in, assume that the person in the black hoodie with the gun is the robber, and they might pull out their gun and just start shooting that person. And what might have actually just happened is they might have actually shot the innocent person. That might actually be the cashier. The cashier might have, from the time the police officer was dispatched and arrived on the scene, the cashier could have managed to get the gun away from the robber and maybe ended up shooting the robber. And it's the robber on the ground. So if a police officer clings to their perceptions, they could make an unwise decision and just rush in there and start shooting somebody who otherwise is actually innocent. So what police officers are taught to do is to walk in, of course, with their gun drawn, put down the gun, police, put down the gun. Well, if you're innocent and you look and you see that it's the police, the first thing you're going to do is put the gun down because you're like, thank goodness the police are here. Finally, right? But if you're actually the robber and you turn and you see the police, you're going to turn and you're going to point the gun at the police officer. And that's when the police officer is then going to shoot you, right? So as a police officer, you're taught not to cling to your perceptions because you can find yourself in a whole lot of difficulties. You need to investigate. You need to figure out what is going on here. And the way that you do that is through questions. You could potentially tell your child, hey, clean your room. I need you to clean your room. This would be really wise for you. Please clean your room, or whatever you say. And you go away, and 2 hours later, you come back and you walk into their bedroom, and maybe there's stuff all over the floor. And maybe your perception is they didn't clean their room. But you don't know that to be true because you weren't there for the last 2 hours. You would like to walk into the room and say, what happened? I see there's stuff everywhere. I thought you were going to clean your room. Like, what happened? Right? And what you might hear from them is, I did clean my room, Dad. I did clean my room, Mom. Right before you walked in, I bumped into that cabinet and all this stuff just fell all over the floor. Right? Whereas if you just cling to your perception and you assume that they haven't cleaned their room, you might walk in there and start hollering and yelling and damaging your relationship because of the unskillfulness, because of the craving for your child to listen to you and your craving for their room to be clean. When you walk in and you see that they haven't cleaned their room, at least that's the perception that you have, you cling to that perception, you're making unwise decisions. So you would always like to ask questions and investigate. Where if you're sitting in that business meeting and somebody walks in looking handsome and beautiful and you cling to your perception that look at them, they just want to look so beautiful or so handsome, you're just clinging to a belief or an opinion. You haven't really developed your mind in a way that clears that out, and it doesn't allow you to cling to any particular perception. So these perceptions are going to be developed based in certain situations where other people are around, and your ego can be involved in developing your perceptions. And you would like to clear all of this out and not cling to any perception. That whatever you see is just what you see. What you've seen is somebody walked into the room. That's all that's happened. Anything else is just your mind telling you a story and clinging to that perception. And now you might start making unwise decisions that produces difficult circumstances in your life. So not only does the mind cling to perceptions, not only does the ego have these certain unwholesome qualities that it projects on others and read that as coming back from them when in reality it's coming from your own mind. But another thing that the ego does is there's certain wholesome qualities that you have in your own mind. And you might project those, and you want other people, because of your craving for permanence, you might want other people to do these same things too and be frustrated when they don't do it. Like let's just say your mind identifies with, I am vegan, right? And now the mind thinks like, oh, it's so horrible when people eat meat, and I am vegan and everybody should be vegan, and anybody who's not vegan is horrible, or something like this, right? I've heard these things from people at different times. So if your mind clings to this identity of I am vegan, and now you think that this is a wholesome quality, and now you project this onto others, and you want other people to do this. You have a certain craving or an expectation of other people to do this. Now the mind's going to attempt to control others to do these same things. And you might try to forcibly convince people to do the wholesome things that you're doing, when in reality, that's just your ego. That's the mind saying, I am vegan, they are not, what I'm doing is better. I need to force this person to do things my way because what they're doing is wrong and what I'm doing is right. Right? Like this isn't what you would like to do because people are just going to be driven away from you. When you do those kinds of things to people, they're just going to push you aside. You're not going to be able to live harmoniously with people. So what you might be coming to the conclusion of more and more is that the ego serves no purpose. It just stands in your way of having harmonious relationships. It's doing all these different things. It's sabotaging your ability to reside harmoniously with others. And it's sabotaging your ability to get to enlightenment. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you're not going to be putting yourself above people or below people. You're just going to see yourself as a humble person. You'll just see yourself as being just like everybody else, right? You won't necessarily identify with I am humble, but the mind will have been humbled, where you'll just see yourself as everybody else. That while other people might judge you or other people might see themselves as being above you, you don't see it that way. Your mind will have to have eliminated that. And it takes many months and many years to train the mind to do this. So you gradually chip away at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some tools and techniques to be able to help you learn how to get rid of personal existence view and get rid of conceit. Because these are two different fetters and they have two different symptoms, there's two different approaches to actually eliminating them. So I'm going to break it down in these two different ways. But first, I see there's some questions coming in, so I'm going to answer those. And if you guys have any questions, you're welcome to let me know by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and I will help you. Okay, so Helen has a question. How does others' professional career typically evolve as they gradually dissolve the ego? Thank you for all the patient answers. So as somebody dissolves their ego and they learn how to relate to everybody harmoniously, they're going to find that it's more easy to actually progress in their career. Because when you're degrading and diminishing other people and you're putting other people down, and this is only going to result in those same things occurring for you, that people are going to try to push you down, right? If you have all this boastfulness, you're puffed up, you're egotistical and going around and trying to show off to other people, people aren't going to like that. And they're going to try to actively push you down. And it's going to hinder you from being able to excel in the workforce. But by you being humble and being able to relate to all beings harmoniously, you'll see that a lot of people will be willing to work with you and people will be pleased to work with you. Because maybe as a boss, for example, let's just say if you don't have ego, you're going to listen to your employees, you're going to understand them, you're going to solicit their advice and their opinions, you're going to listen to what it is they have to say. And in certain situations where they share insight, you might involve some of their ideas into your plan of how you're going to execute a particular project. And now your employees are like, wow, the boss listens to me. Wow, the boss doesn't think he's above me or she's above me. Like they see me as a human being and they are taking heed to my advice. They look at my ideas and my opinions as being valid and important. And now you're going to find that you'll have many people that are interested in working with you. And then you'll see that people are willing to promote you, right? One of the things that I often have said in my past is that if somebody's going to be rich or famous or excel in a particular career, they can't choose to do that by themselves. Like you can't be rich by yourself. You can't be famous by yourself. You're going to need other people who are willing to support you, right? Because you can't just go out and poof and instantly create and manifest a bunch of money. You can't just poof and manifest a bunch of fame. Where if these are things that you're actually interested in acquiring, there's going to need to be countless other people that are willing to give you money in order to help you to become more wealthy. And not that that's going to lead to any kind of happiness or anything like that, but I'm just using this as an example to help you see that in order to be successful in life, you're going to need lots of harmonious relationships. You can't just go off in a cave and become a successful person. You're going to need to have harmonious relationships. So while people think about success in terms of money or fame or things like this, I think of success in terms of, do you have harmonious relationships? If you have lots of harmonious relationships, you'll never have to worry about money. Never, because there's going to be plenty of people who are willing to support you. Whatever product you're selling, whatever service you're partaking in, there'll be plenty of people that are willing to contribute to that because you have lots of harmonious relationships. So if somebody stops focusing on money and fame and they start focus on building harmonious relationships, which means you're going to need to dissolve the ego, that's where you can be really successful in life. Okay, so we have more coming in from Helena. And would an enlightened person be potentially interested in being a lead singer performer? It's a job usually associated with personal existence view or in being a fashion model. So these types of things, while we in the unenlightened state with a lack of wisdom typically attribute them to personal existence view, an individual doesn't have to do those with personal existence view. You can be a performer and a singer. You can be a fashion model without personal existence view. But oftentimes people associate it with that. So it's not the job or occupation itself, it's how the mind is relating to this. So you could be the most beautiful, most handsome person that's ever walked the face of the earth. But your mind can just see yourself just like everybody else. And you might decide, and other people might consider, like, hey, this would be a great model. Let's see if they would be willing to be a model. And maybe that's what you decide to do. But as you're walking down that runway or you're having photo shoots, in your mind, you're not thinking of yourself of being above people or below people. You're just, doing this work because this is what you enjoy. And you enjoy being able to provide this service of being a model. So it's not the job itself. It's not the object itself. It's about how the mind relates to this particular experience. So there isn't any one particular job that is personal existence view or isn't personal existence view, or is conceited or isn't conceited. Because, for example, depending on where you live, maybe if you interact with police officers, people might assume that police officers have a lot of ego because they go around maybe being boastful and arrogant, chest puffed out, and wanting everybody to bow down to them and be afraid of them. Well, there are some communities and some police officers that function that way. But there's other communities in other countries where police officers don't function that way, where they're quite humble and they're quite helpful and they're, down to earth, and they're very much about providing service to the public. So it's not about the job or occupation. That's just the mind being conditioned to think that way, that instead you can see that every person functioning in a certain job or occupation can do it in a unique way. And not everybody who's a fashion model has personal existence view. Just like every police officer doesn't have ego, or just like every singer isn't functioning through personal existence view. But I understand that that's what the mind will typically see, because that's probably a lot of the examples that you see in the world. You see a lot of people doing that, but that doesn't have to be the case. An enlightened being could be a singer or a performer or a fashion model. An enlightened being could surely do that. And they would do it really well because their mind would be very well trained. Okay, Jacob, you have a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I would like to ask, because from my experience, I perceive people quite same level, everyone, and that living in UK for quite a while, that put me in many situations when people told me that I'm arrogant, because I shouldn't do that in their opinion. So I stopped even sharing that with people at some point. And it's just like, is there a way for keeping it, but without triggering other people? I know other people triggers are their responsibility, but from my experience, whenever I come with this idea, people are usually not happy about it. And the other thing I would like to ask about is...
Let me just handle one at a time, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Of course.
Sure. So let me make sure I understand what you're sharing. What you're sharing is that when you try to be humble, other people don't like that and they tell you not to do it?
Yeah, in many occasions they perceive it as being arrogant, that I perceive them same as everyone else.
Okay.
Basically.
So what I just shared about how the ego projects its unwholesome qualities on others and reads that as coming from others when in fact it's coming from themselves, you need to understand that that's what other people are experiencing too. So if you know in your mind with 100% certainty that you're being humble and you're being down to earth, and then other people are calling you arrogant, you should look at that and decide whether or not, this is true or false. But if you know with 100% certainty that you're being humble, this can be their ego projecting their unwholesome qualities onto you and reading it as if it's coming from you when in reality it's coming from their own mind. So I'll give you an example of this. Here at the temple that I teach in, I sit in a chair. For 15 years or so, I used to sit on the floor and I would teach on the floor because I was very comfortable sitting on the floor right along with my students, and that's how I would teach. But in 2019, I got into a motorbike accident, and now I can't sit cross-legged on the floor for more than probably about maybe 30 minutes. And then I need to stretch my legs. So I needed to start sitting in a chair. So now I sit in a chair so that I can mostly sit cross-legged. I sit cross-legged in this chair for extended periods of time because it's a larger chair. It's designed to be able to sit cross-legged. But then every once in a while, I have to sit on the edge of the chair and I put my legs out so I can stretch them, right? So I've had a student, just one in the past, that said that I was being arrogant and conceitful because I was sitting in a chair and I was sitting above my students and I should sit on the floor. And they said every teacher they've ever had has always sat on the floor, and that I was being ego and arrogant for doing so. Well, I knew right away that this wasn't true because I sat on the floor for 15 years and I need to sit in a chair now because of my legs. And when I went to the store, where they have stores here in Thailand where they sell furniture for temples, and man, they had such elaborate chairs. They have gold ones and different glitter and all this other stuff all over it. And I got the most basic, most simple chair that I could find at this place, right? So when this person was saying this, I knew right away that this was their ego projecting onto me and reading that as if it's coming from me, when in reality it's coming from them, because I know the reason why I sit in a chair is because I need to stretch my legs. That's the only reason. Because for 15 years prior to that, I always sat on the floor. But this person's perception was that, he's got ego because he wants to be above people, when in reality, that's his own mind. He didn't take the time to ask, David, why do you sit in a chair, right? He instead just clung to his perception, right? If he would have asked me, why do I sit in a chair? I would have explained it to him. And then the other reason why I sit in a chair is because when people are in the back of the room, they can actually see me. Whereas if I sat on the floor, they wouldn't be able to see me, right? So you're going to see that this occurs. So if you're in a situation where you know that you're being humble, but other people are sharing with you that you're being arrogant and egotistical, look at that stuff, but at the same time realize that this could be their mind projecting their unwholesome qualities on you, and then reading it as coming from them, from you, when in reality it's coming from themselves. Particularly when people are giving you unsolicited advice. If someone's giving you unsolicited advice, this is actually their ego right from the beginning. If somebody steps into your life and says, hey man, you're being so arrogant and egotistical here, you got to change that and you got to do this and you got to do that. That's their ego judging you. They've already judged you as being one way or another. And now they're stepping in an unsolicited way and telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing. So right away, you know that this person has ego because you didn't ask for their advice. They're just giving you this unsolicited advice. And that's not the way that someone who has eliminated their ego functions. Someone who's eliminated their ego, they're not going to give unsolicited advice to somebody. So if somebody's giving you unsolicited advice, right away, you know that they have ego involved. So keep those things in mind. Continue to work on being humble and down to earth. But when other people are trying to tell you these kinds of things, you got to take it with a grain of salt, realize that it could be their own ego that is being experienced here, and still look at what it is someone's telling you. Even if it's unsolicited advice, it's wise to look at it later, reflect on it, but just realize that this is coming from their own ego.
Yeah, but what if advice is brought in a manner way? Let's say, you have a conversation with someone and then in the middle, okay, but could I advise you something? Then that would be okay.
Right. In that situation, it's not unsolicited. They've asked you, they said, can I share something with you that could be helpful for you? And then you say, yes, sure. In this situation, you're agreeing and you're saying, yes, I'm open to your advice. Because even me as a teacher of Buddhist teaching, students come to me all the time to learn and understand teachings. They sit in classes with me many, many days. They have personal conversations with me. I will oftentimes, when I am kind of getting to know a student, I will say, are you interested in my advice on that topic? Or would you like to hear my thoughts on that topic? Just making doubly sure, even though they're coming to me, I usually will make doubly sure. So if you have a friend or family member or a coworker who's saying to you in an unsolicited way, here's some advice, right away, that's their ego involved. But if they ask you, like, hey, would you like to hear some thoughts and ideas that I have? In this situation, they're looking for you to open the door and to say yes and acknowledge that. And in this situation, the advice isn't unsolicited. They're first getting your permission before they share it with you.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I got one more question because basically I've been brought in here because I've been advised that meditation could help me with getting rid of some of the things that I'm struggling with. And one of them is codependency, which is kind of like addiction of helping others and stuff. Like when I help others, I feel good. So for a long time, I seen it as a kind of symbiosis thing where, you know, I help others and I feel good, so it's all okay. But then I dive deeper into psychology and I realized that it kind of keeps me in a circle when I'm not really fulfilling myself because there is always someone in front, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So what you're
Instead of me doing.
Yeah. So what you're describing is what I would refer to as a craving to practice generosity, where you're giving and sharing your time, effort, energy, and resources. You're longing, yearning, and craving to help others. And even though it's a wholesome thing to be able to help others, you still need to do it from the middle way. That's what the Buddha is teaching you. Whereas if you're longing, yearning, and craving to help others, you're going to experience difficulties and struggles there because your mind is not in the middle. You're going to deplete your resources of your time, effort, energy, and resources. But then if you were on the other side of that, where you were indifferent and selfish and you could care less about helping people, that's not where you're interested in being either. You need to come to the middle way where you do choose to help people in certain situations, but realize that you can't do that all the time. And then also you need to train your mind not to form inner feelings based on whether or not you're helping people or not, because you can't permanently help people because of impermanence. So if you can only feel good when you're helping people, when you're not able to help people, because you're not going to be able to help people all the time, when you're not able to help them, you'll feel miserable and you feel sad. So you got to eliminate the craving to help people and bring it more to the middle where you do choose to help people in certain situations, but in other situations you choose not to, and that you can still maintain your joy whether you're helping people or you're not.
Yeah, that's basically what I was thinking, like trying to get to some healthy level of that, so I wouldn't sabotage myself in a way for others. Like I wouldn't sabotage my own progress, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
Just like you said, by giving the resources that maybe I supposed to keep for myself at the times, like time or efforts or any of these. So would you say that this course would help me with that in basic and the teachings of Buddha?
Absolutely. That's what his whole teachings are about. And you're coming about 60% of the way through the program, which is fine because people will join at different times. But if you go back to looking at some of the videos that I've recorded, that all these classes are live streamed, you can see that what you're asking about, I've actually already taught. But also what you could do is just keep on going forward in the program, because I'm going to restart it. Every 7 months, I restart it from the very beginning. So it's going to restart again in October. So another 2 months, 2.5 months, it'll restart from the beginning. But I've already taught what it is you're asking. So the teachings of the Buddha are specifically designed to accomplish what it is what you're describing, which is training to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. But you need to learn the wisdom of how to actually do that, which you don't have right now.
Yeah, okay. Just one more question. This is the last one. Our lessons are only on Sunday and Wednesday, or they are like through the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then it's off.
I have different programs, different courses, different retreats. This program is each Sunday and Wednesday. This is where we go through this book chapter by chapter over a 7-month period. Then there's a course like I'm teaching starting tomorrow. It's a 5-day course where I'm teaching the Foundation and the Path to Enlightenment course. So it all depends what amount of time you have, and your ability to learn and grow, that you can take all these different courses and retreats and programs depending on what's best for your schedule and what works best for you.
All right, so I'm thinking I'm on the wrong course because I signed out for a 30 hours course, which I believe was 5 days in a row. So maybe because of the times difference, I got mixed up.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
That starts tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thai time. So if you're in the UK then or Europe, that's going to be really early for you. But those morning sessions will be recorded. So if you don't make those morning sessions, you'll be able to watch them in the recording. But by the time we get to the afternoon sessions, you might be able to attend those live.
Okay, thank you very much. I try to attend it live because I think it's like 6 hours ahead, the Thai time.
Yeah.
So that would be like 3 o'clock in the morning for me. I guess, but I try to attend on those lessons. So just don't be surprised if for this reason I'm not gonna be able to continue on Wednesday, because obviously I would like to go into this 5 days course first.
Yeah, no worries. You pick whatever course works best for you. I'm here to help anybody and everybody.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, you're welcome. So you're welcome, Helena. I see your thank you there. And Julia has a question here. She says, I have trouble practicing equanimity and sympathetic joy when good things happen to people. I'm not as joyful as when it happens to my friends. How do I get rid of this preferential treatment? Thank you so much. Also, sometimes I have these superstitious from my culture that I have a hard time getting rid of. Like a broken mirror means a broken soul, or I know doing rituals is wrong to get rid of bad luck, but I also feel bad when things like this happen. Julia, if we can talk about that another time, because I'd like to keep going forward. I'm just looking at the time. I'd like to be sure that we cover our topic for today. Maybe you can schedule a personal guidance session, or maybe you can send me a private message and we can talk about that and I'll help you, because that's important for you to learn those things. But let me just go forward here since we've already been having quite a bit of discussion on other topics today. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so now let's go through some ways to eliminate personal existence view and then eliminate conceit, because you guys are starting to see this and understand it about how it's plaguing the mind. So to eliminate personal existence view, you can learn the meditation to realize non-self. This is in volume 1, chapter 11, and I've taught this already in this program, and I teach it in other programs as well. You're going to need to be able to do that, but you wouldn't just start off with doing that. You would first develop your foundation in the Eightfold Path, which includes breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity and all those other teachings. And then as your mind's getting into the jhanas, that's where you would like to start bringing in this meditation to realize non-self. So that's a meditation that will help you. You can also change your language and start disassociating with this word my or I am, where oftentimes with personal existence view in the mind, you might say, I am hungry, or I am angry, or I am frustrated, right? You can disassociate with this. You can say things like the body needs food, or the mind is experiencing anger. As long as you keep that I am in your vocabulary, it's going to keep reinforcing this personal existence view. Same thing with the word my, like my son, or my car, or my house, my phone. This is what the personal existence view does, is everything's mine. It belongs to me because there's a me here. So you would like to shed this out of your vocabulary. And in about 90, 95, 98% of the cases, you could actually do that. You can think that the body needs food. Or instead of I have a headache, the head hurts, right? And this will transform the way your mind thinks and the way that you speak. It'll transform all of that and you can start disassociating with that. But there are some situations where you're not going to be able to do that. And the example I usually give is that if I were to introduce you to my son and I said, this is the being that I contributed sperm to create over 12 years ago, you'd be like, huh? What are you talking about? Right? So in that situation, I need to say, this is my son. And I'll introduce him. Oftentimes what I say is, this is Bailan. And he looks so similar to me that people just know that he's my son. But, even though I might say, this is my son, my mind knows, this mind knows he's not mine. He doesn't belong to me. He is his own unique being, making his own unique decisions. And then that helps your mind to let go, right? Not only let go of personal existence view, but let go of any attachment and craving and holding on. You can develop the perception of impermanence through deep observation of impermanence in the world. So if you haven't done this yet, you might need to go around the world. And when you see a crack in the sidewalk, remind yourself of impermanence. You're walking down the street and it's pretty quiet. And the next thing you know, you hear a horn honk or a dog bark. That is impermanence. You see the sun and then the clouds come in front of it and now it's shady. That's impermanence. You're walking down the street and the wind is blowing and then the wind stops blowing. And now you can see this is impermanence. Impermanence is around you all the time. You're constantly experiencing change that you might not be noticing. So you're going to need to develop the perception of impermanence, because when you do, you realize that this body is impermanent, this mind is impermanent, all these things are impermanent, and the mind has less interest in clinging to this because it knows that these things are impermanent. You can wear simple clothing and make your appearance look simple. Like, this is the reason why the Buddha wore simple rag robes, or why people might just wear the same clothes every day. If you see the clothes I wear, I just wear the same clothes every day, the same type of clothes, not the exact same shirt or the exact same pants, but the exact same type of clothes, that the mind doesn't get an opportunity to choose who I'm going to go see today, how am I wanting to look. This is what the mind will do with personal existence view. You'll stand in front of your closet and you'll think, who am I going to see today? And how do I want to appear to that person? And now you'll rifle through your clothes and pick that favorite shirt or that favorite pair of pants or something like that. So you could go out and get a bunch of simple clothes that are just all the same color. Some people do that, but you might not be interested in that. And if that's the case, you can take your current clothes and just stack them on top of each other and just pick off the top. Maybe you have your casual clothes and your formal clothes, and you just pick off the top. And you don't give the mind an opportunity to select what you're going to wear. But be observant, because your mind's going to be wanting to go to the middle of the stack, right? You're going to have certain situations where you're going out and you're like, oh, I want to get that favorite shirt. You're going to need to cut that off and let it go so that you can keep the mind out of the decision about what you're going to wear. It's because when you stack these clothes up, 5, 10 different items, you're just peeling off the top to wear that. Then same thing with jewelry and makeup and scents. The more you shed this out and you don't actually wear those things, it'll help your mind. Because if you have that favorite necklace or that favorite ring or that favorite watch that you go out into the world with, and you would feel naked or lost if you didn't have that with you, that's the mind being attached to it. And it is impermanent. So at some day when you lose that, or it breaks, or you misplace it, or someone steals it or something like this, your mind's going to be shaken up when it's gone. And if you're wearing certain jewelry or scents and you don't feel comfortable going out without these things, this is the mind having personal existence view. So you can train your mind to be able to go outside without these things. And after you do that for 3 months, 6 months, a year perhaps, then maybe someday you do decide to wear these things. Or maybe you're going out somewhere to a job interview or to a nice night out with your partner and you'd like to wear some makeup, go ahead and do that, right? But every once in a while, you might still decide to go out without those things. But initially, you'd like to purge this out of your life, slowly depleting these things that are reinforcing this personal existence view so that you can go out into the world and be comfortable without these things. You might even consider shaving your hair, either on your head or your facial hair. This is one of the things that will propel you to eliminating personal existence view the most. Wearing simple clothes and getting rid of jewelry, makeup, scents, and eliminating facial hair and head hair. That's why the Buddha taught this, during his lifetime. Now, it's usually really hard for men to let go of their facial hair, and it's often very challenging for women to let go of their head hair. You don't have to eliminate these things in order to get to enlightenment. There's surely people who have gotten to enlightenment without these kinds of things. But if you're looking to really accelerate this process, this is one of the ways to do that. And if just the thought of eliminating your facial hair or your head hair, like, you just cringe and you're uncomfortable even thinking about it, that's all the more justification for you to consider whether or not it would be wise for you to do that, because that's going to really help you realizing that this hair is impermanent and it doesn't represent who you are as a person. And you can introduce some impermanence into the situation where you train your mind to not cling to any of this stuff as who you are. Then whenever you see the discontentedness arising, or whenever you see the interest to project a personal existence view or self-identity, you're going to need to cut that off and let it go. This is from the Eightfold Path. In the Eightfold Path, I've taught this as part of this particular program, that whenever you notice discontentedness arising as a bodily sensation, cut that off and let it go. So if you're at that restaurant and 2 tables over, somebody is saying something disparaging about your nationality and you're noticing the frustration arising, cut that off and let it go. That's going to help you get rid of personal existence view, right? Or you're noticing any other thing, cut it off and let it go. Like say you're got your clothes stacked up. Maybe you took that particular step and you stacked up your clothes, but now you see your mind's going for the middle of the stack and trying to pull that favorite shirt out. Cut that off and let it go. This is what that is talking about. And then there's seeking guidance with the teacher over multiple sessions. You're going to need to do that because there's some students who've been studying with me for many years. And even the first year or two, they're regularly typically asking questions about personal existence view and how to eliminate it, what it is and how to eliminate it. Because it takes time to be able to understand what it is and how to eliminate it. So let me know if you guys have any questions here on how to eliminate personal existence view before we move into talking about conceit. It looks like Leela has a question here. I meditated on impermanence today, watching the smoke come off the end of an incense. Okay, yeah, that's one way to develop the perception of impermanence in the mind, is just observing it. Now that is different than the breathing mindfulness meditation, as you probably know, Leela, but that's helping to develop the perception of impermanence in the mind. So I wouldn't think of it as a meditation. I think of it as the way that the Buddha talks about it, which is developing the perception of impermanence, where you're just sitting there and you're looking at the impermanent nature of this smoke coming off the incense. And that's one of the ways to help you to soak in impermanence into the mind. Yep. Let me see if we have any questions coming in on YouTube or Facebook. Okay. All right, Mayuli, I see you're planning to schedule a session there. So excellent. We'll talk about it then. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. So now let's talk about how to eliminate conceit. Remember, the conceit is where the mind's thinking that you're above people or you're below people, talking down to people or putting yourself under people and being uncalm and shaken up, where the mind thinks everybody's above you. And this is just going to cause you difficulty. So it needs to be eliminated from the mind. One of the things you can do is say thank you or sorry frequently, speaking polite and kind, using words like sir or ma'am, because each language has a certain way of ensuring that people know that you're being polite and respectful. In the Thai language, we have certain ways of doing that. And in English, we usually say sir or ma'am. But depending on what language you speak, you might need to look at that language and figure out how to ensure you can be practicing in a humble way and show respect and gratitude and appreciation to other people. The phrase, I do not know, is really excellent for the ego. In situations where there's somebody asking a question, if there's ego there, you won't be interested to say, I don't know. The mind will try to finagle and say any other thing except I do not know. The ego doesn't want to say that because it wants to project itself and look boastful in front of others. So get in the habit of saying, I don't know, right? When somebody asks you a question, it's so liberating. It's so free to just say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But you know what? Who does? I bet Google does, right? I bet Google knows the answer, or maybe, our boss knows the answer, or maybe my wife knows the answer, or something like that. This is really helpful for the mind. One of the really helpful things for the conceit is sleeping in a low position where you're on the floor. where you might need to get rid of your frame, your box spring, and just put the mattress straight on the floor. Here in Thailand, because the culture is informed by Buddhism for so many countless generations, it's very hard to find a bed that is higher than your knee. That's essentially what you would like. You would like your bed to be at knee height or below. For me, I just have my mattress straight on the floor. And it's not going to be like 1 week that you do this and the ego's gone. But by putting your bed on the floor and you go down into bed and you get up out of bed each day, and you're having to do that when you're going to the bathroom too, this is really helpful for the mind. It's humbling to the mind and it's grounding, and you might even find you sleep a lot better. So putting your bed on the ground or very low below your knee, this is what would be really helpful for you. If there's certain tasks that you think are beneath you, like maybe scrubbing floors or washing toilets or doing laundry or washing dishes or something like this, you could do those things and it would train your mind to see this as you're not above anybody and you can be humble. So if there's any tasks that you think are beneath you, you can put your mind in those situations and actually do it to humble the mind. You can listen to other people teach you wisdom without any interest to teach them anything. And this is what you guys are doing now for the most part. You guys are listening to somebody share wisdom with you without an interest to teach that person anything whatsoever. So you would like to regularly do this, not just in these classes, but in other places as well. You can also wash people's feet. This is something that they do here in Thai culture, where like maybe on your birthday, maybe Mother's Day, Father's Day, New Year's, times like this, you might go to your parents or a teacher or somebody else that you respect, and you might bring a bowl of water, you might wash their feet. And this is a way of humbling your mind and also showing appreciation and gratitude. Because while you're doing this, you actually say some kind words like, Mom, thank you so much for giving me life. I appreciate everything that you've done for me in order to help me. You might disagree with some of the things that your parents have done. I'm sure you do. But regardless, your mom went through a lot of difficulties to bring you into the world. Every single one of us has a mom that carried us for a certain amount of time in their womb. And when we were brought out into the world, they went through a lot of pain and a lot of difficulties. So whether it's your mom or your dad or certain people that you admire or respect, you can wash people's feet and share some kind words with them with sharing your appreciation. And respecting somebody doesn't mean you're putting yourself below them. You can respect people without putting yourself below people. You can see this as an example in people's lives, how you can be respectful without putting yourself below people. So being humble and respecting people doesn't mean you're putting yourself below others. You can show respect and gratitude to people through a why. This is something that's starting to universally and internationally be understood as appreciation, as gratitude. Here in Thailand, they do this, and in other cultures as well. Here in Thailand, maybe 15, 20, 30 times a day, I'm going around whying people, whether it's at 7-Eleven, whether it's the food delivery person who brings me food, whether it's the people in our village or what have you. I'm constantly going around, whying people and bowing my head. And I even do this when I travel. When I go to America, when I went to Egypt a couple of years ago, same thing. I was bowing and whying to people, and they absolutely loved it. They thought it was wonderful. I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for my own mind. This is my practice. And I'm getting ready to go to Mexico here in about a month. I'll do the same thing there too. I'm not doing it for them. I know that this is universally true, and this is the way that I need to function in the world. And I have this permanent practice that I treat everybody the same. So just like I why to a person here in Thailand, I'm going to why to a person in Mexico too. Even I why to my son. My son sometimes brings me a glass of water, and I will why to him and say, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate your kindness, or something like that. I don't do it every single time, but every once in a while I do that, right? So you can do these kinds of things to integrate this humbleness in the mind, and that's what will gradually wear it away. You can practice generosity, loving kindness, and compassion. This will help humble your mind as well. You can eliminate judgment where you're not comparing others. So wherever you see that judgment coming up, you can cut it off and let it go. Be kind and gentle because you know it's the right thing to do, not because you want anything from anybody. Ask other people advice in what they've learned in life, and just listen without trying to prove anything to them. So if you're like in a social situation and people are sharing certain things about their life, if there's ego there, you might want to try to come above them. Right? When you see somebody come in with their ego, your ego might say, oh, no, I want to be above them. right? So when other people have ego, just smile, right? No need for your ego to come out and try to knock them down. That would be unwise. So just listen to people, what they've learned, and just ask questions. This can be really helpful without trying to prove anything to them. You can help others without any expectation of anything in return for yourself. And seeking guidance from a teacher can help the mind admit to itself that it doesn't know everything in the world. And any time that you see arrogance or pride or measuring and comparing coming up, you can cut that off and let it go. That's part of the Eightfold Path that you're learning. And then seek guidance with teachers over multiple sessions. So I just went through this a little bit quickly because just looking at time, I like to try to keep the class to a certain period of time and being sensitive to your schedule. But let me see if you guys have any questions. We can go deeper into any of these if you like. Feel free to put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys for joining. I appreciate that you've decided today's a day that you'd like to learn the teachings of the Buddha. And at the same time, you're invited to attend these classes in the future. Next week, I'm going to be in chapter 17, which is titled Eliminating Fear. Are you really scared? Here, I'm going to teach you how to eliminate your fears. There's certain specific things that you can do in order to actually eliminate your fears. And then as you guys heard, tomorrow I'm starting a course Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is a course I teach every month. It's the first full week of every month, which is the foundation and the path to enlightenment. This is essentially the first 2 months of the group learning program. So if you like a refresher on those kinds of things, you can either attend live or you can listen to the recordings. Or if you've never learned those at all, you can actually attend either live or listen to the recordings as well. And then, of course, you have the Pali Canon and English study group and all the times that we come together on Wednesday to be able to do meditation and open up to any questions that you guys have. So thank you all for joining for today, and perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Take care and be well. Sawadee Kap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.